Live from Citizen TV, this is Tonight with Sam Gituku.
Hello there, thank you for choosing Citizen TV on this 4th day of December 2025. And tonight, we are paying some special focus. The government has announced, as well as the Safaricom Limited, that the government will be selling part of its shareholding within Safaricom. It is a stake of 15%. We'll be talking about that. And to respond to our questions, we'll be speaking to the Cabinet Secretary in charge of National Treasury and Economic Planning, that is John Mbadi, who will be here in studio to answer all your questions that you may have. And of course, for that, Newsgang sets the space for us to have that important conversation, including the questions about the economy and the privatization law now in practice. But first, here are the top stories tonight. Gunshots and running battles, 3 killed, several others injured as residents of Isulu in Kakamega clash with police over gold mining dispute. Massive sale. Government offloads 15% Safaricom stake to Vodacom in a 244 billion shilling deal. Unconstitutional. High Court declares the president has no power to constitute body on protest victim compensation.
Ni uhalifu mkubwa unaoendelea kuhamasishwa. Hali kama hii kwa nchi yoyote ile duniani ni tishio kubwa la maisha ya watu.
Review required. United States to review relationship with Tanzania after the government's ongoing repression and disturbing violence against civilians. Our sign language interpreter is Njoki Shige. Tonight, we begin the story that tension is high in Ikolomani, Kakamega County after a day of fierce running battles between police and residents that left 3 people dead and 25 police officers injured. A public participation forum organized by the National Environment Management Authority, NEMA, to discuss a proposed gold extraction project by a private investor turned chaotic when rowdy youth armed with crude weapons blocked the road to Musali Mixed Day and Boarding Senior School and attacked the convoy. Several journalists were also injured in the clashes, which left a trail of destruction at the school. Gatete Njoroge reports.
Gunshots, tear gas, stones. Isulu in Ikolomani transformed from a quiet gold mining community into a full-blown battleground. What began as a relatively calm day quickly descended into chaos as hundreds of residents clashed with police in fierce running battles. The confrontation turned deadly. 3 people were shot and killed, while 25 police officers and several journalists were injured in the mayhem.
Wanatuua bila hatia. Na kama sisi hakuna shamba ya serikali hapa, shamba ni yetu, watu waachie nafasi yetu. Sisi hatutaki mambo mengi, jamaa huyu msungu aende.
Nilisaliwa hapa, nitakufia hapa. Sitahama. Tumekataa. Waje watuue.
The clash erupted over a planned NEMA public participation exercise linked to Shanta Gold Company's proposed extraction of gold, valued at roughly 680 billion shillings. Residents say they oppose the project, warning it will displace around 800 families and strip them of their livelihoods.
Walisema mambo ilikuwa 3. Community, serikali na Nehema. Walisema kati ya hao watu 3, kama community imekataa, kazi wezi kufanyika. Sasa sisi community tumekataa. Hatutaki kwa sababu hatukukubaliana vile tulitaka.
Sisi hatutaki maneno ya shanda. Kwa vile tukikaribisha shanda tutakula wapi? Hakuna maneno kama hiyo. Mimi kama mama nakula kwa karai, nakula kwa ponj. Hakuna maneno ya mashini.
Nimetoka Migori, nimekuja kufanya biashara hapa ili niweze kulisha watoto wangu juu mimi ni mjane, na sasa hao wanataka kutunyang'anya shamba na hao watu wote Waluya wataenda kuishi wapi?
From Isulu, The group marched straight to Musali Mixed Day and Boarding Senior School, the designated venue for the NEMA meeting. Their anger was unleashed on chairs, books, and shelves. Police, who have launched investigations into the incident, say the protests appear to have been orchestrated by a criminal gang with specific targets in mind.
Any sane person cannot go and destroy a school where children acquire knowledge. I think this must be fellows with a very ill motive in the community. And I want to assure the public that we will want to pursue the perpetrators of this heinous act to the logical end and ensure that they are brought to book.
2 police officers who sustained serious injuries are currently receiving treatment at Kakamega County General Teaching and Referral Hospital. Additionally, police reinforcements have been deployed to the area to restore calm. Meanwhile, the NEMA public participation exercise has been called off. Gatete Njoroge, Citizen TV.
The High Court has this evening ruled that President William Ruto's task force on compensation of victims of police brutality is unconstitutional. The judges held that the mandate to handle such matters lies solely with the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. And as Emily Chebet now reports, the Commission has 30 days to implement the required changes, failing which the President's proclamations will be rendered invalid.
The High Court sitting in Kerugoya has dealt a significant setback to the 18-member panel appointed by President William Ruto in August to oversee compensation for victims of demonstrations and political protests dating back to 2017. Justice Edward Muriithi ruled that the President overstepped his constitutional authority.
Declaration that the President is not constitutionally empowered to constitute a panel of experts based on the design of a framework for compensation of victims of the human rights abuses, a matter which falls in the competence of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights.
In a far-reaching directive, the court ordered that the controversial report be handed over to the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, which must now take up the executive action and make any necessary amendments to align the process with the Constitution.
The appropriate remedy in this petition is not the striking out or questioning of the proclamation and the Gazette appointing the panel, but allowing the necessary amendment as necessary to be done to bring them in agreement with the constitutional statutory scheme.
The petition filed by lawyer Levi Munyiri sought to invalidate the president's actions, but the judge clarified that the presidential proclamation will not be automatically quashed after 30 days, only that failure to comply with the constitution will render it invalid.
It appears to be a case of good intentions, bad execution, and it is not necessary to quash the proclamation if it is suitably amended.
The panel, constituted through a Gazette notice dated August 25th, was chaired by the President's Senior Advisor on Constitutional Affairs and Human Rights, Professor Makau Mutua. But its work seemed shaken from the start, with the court suspending its mandate just weeks later in September. The panel's turbulence did not end there. LSK President Faith Odhiambo, initially appointed as Vice Chair, resigned midway, forcing a leadership shakeup that saw KNCHR Chairperson Clarice Onganga Onyango step in to take over the role. Emily Chebet, Citizen TV.
The National Treasury has announced plans by the government to offload 15% of its stake in telco service provider Safaricom. This will see the government raise some 244.5 billion shillings from the over 6 billion shares which will be transferred to Vodafone Kenya. Treasury, however, maintains that the company will remain a Kenyan brand despite majority of the shares being owned by Vodacom upon completion of the transaction, listing several conditions that have been agreed upon as part of efforts to safeguard Kenyan interests. Jimmy Mbogo now elaborates how the divestiture is expected to provide the seed capital for the National Infrastructure Fund, with the Treasury hinting at similar transactions in the days ahead.
The move by the government to sell off 15% of its shares will see the balance of power at East Africa's leading telco service provider, Safaricom, shift significantly in favor of South African-based Vodacom. The divestiture by government will see its stake in the company reduced from 35% to 20%, while public investors will retain a 25% stake. Vodacom, which owns 87.5% stake in Vodafone Kenya, will increase its stake by acquiring 100% of Vodafone Kenya through an internal restructuring. This will leave Vodacom with a controlling stake in the company of over 50%.
Well, it will take our shareholding to just under 55%, because we're also buying the Vodafone stake as well. It stands out as not just a standout company in Kenya, but in and not just in the East African community, but I would say globally. So, fantastic company, fantastic development capabilities and so on that we can also export into the broader groups.
This is a partial divestment, and the government will continue to retain a significant stake in the company. This decision follows rigorous analysis, independent valuation advice, and compliance with the Public Finance Management Act and other regulatory requirements.
According to Treasury Cabinet Secretary John Mbadi, the funds raised in the divestiture will be used as seed capital for the National Infrastructure Fund, aimed at raising resources without subjecting Kenyans to more debt or higher taxes to meet development needs.
I urge Parliament, and more particularly National Assembly, to expedite the approval of the instruments required to establish the two funds, ensuring they are operational by the time the transfer occurs, so Kenyans can begin enjoying the benefits immediately.
To further safeguard Kenya's interest in the transaction, Treasury has outlined several conditions that have been put in place as part of the transaction, which include that no employee redundancy are declared by the company, that the chairman and the chief executive officer of the company shall at all times be citizens of Kenya, and that no changes to the executive committee of the company as constituted on the signature date without the consent of the chief executive officer. Further, prior to supporting any expansion outside Kenya, that the company shall consult the government of Kenya in respect to such expansion. Further, no significant changes to local suppliers within the next 3 years following the signature date, among others.
In my view, and in the view of our advisors, we have secured Kenyans' interest because this has and remains a Kenyan company.
Of concern in the transaction, however, is the move by the government to forego future dividend payout from the company to Vodafone Kenya for an upfront payment of 40.2 billion shillings. The announcement by the National Treasury of its intention to offload 15% of its stake in Safaricom at a cost of 240.5 billion shillings is expected to raise questions on whether the government could have raised more by allowing competitive bidding. But according to Treasury Cabinet Secretary John Mbadi, a block sale was the best option, selling at a premium of 23%, even as he promised that more transactions of this nature will follow. Jimmy Mbogo, Citizen TV, Nairobi.
And the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Economic Planning, John Mbadi, is already here in studio. He'll be speaking to us about that exact transaction that has been announced by the government, at the same time by Safaricom. He'll answer your questions. But first, Kiharu Member of Parliament, Ndindi Nyoro, says the planned sale of government shares in Safaricom has been undervalued, accusing the National Treasury of underselling the shares. The former budget chair in the National Assembly says Kenyans will lose money from the sale of the shares, saying Treasury did not take time to negotiate on behalf of Kenyans and was only keen to operationalize the infrastructure fund at the expense of taxpayers' money.
The government of Kenya is proposing to sell Safaricom PLC, the 15% stake, at 34 shillings. Kenyans need to know that Safaricom shares were trading at an average of 45 shillings in 2021, valuing Safaricom PLC at 1.8 trillion Kenya shillings in 2021. And of course, that is before Safaricom even invested in Ethiopia, an investment that is actually becoming a very good decision for Safaricom. And what I just want to say is that the people who are on the other side of the table in this negotiation of the sale, and especially the people from the National Treasury, they are either self-interested, incompetent, or both.
All right. Good evening, Waziri. And let us get started from that point that Mheshimiwa Ndindi Nyoro left it at. On the question of the pricing, he says that there's a time the price of Safaricom share was nearly 45 shillings. Of course, around 2021, you see 43, 44 thereabout, versus now the price of 34 shillings. You can help us understand how you arrived at that price?
First of all, Sam, let me put it clear that we are working with the current prices of Safaricom shares in the market. And you see, Safaricom is a company that is quoted in the Nairobi Securities Exchange. So you don't even have to do research to tell Kenyans what the price is. The latest price of Safaricom shares is 28 shillings today. In the past 6 months, leading to 31st October, the prices averaged around 25 shillings per share. And therefore, we took, the analysis took 6 months of volume prices, and the average came to about 25 shillings per share. And we are getting 34 shillings per share. So I don't know how you can negotiate better than that. Don't even talk about the historical, because we may start discussing when, how much it was when. We are dealing with the current pricing of the Safaricom shares. And this is something that is in the market. No one controls it, no one determines it. And so in my view, even though Honorable Ndindi is talking of people conflicted or incompetent or both, it is, I completely believe that he is the latter. Incompetent.
Right. Of course, he's not here to explain what you just said there. But speaking of the price per share, help us understand, because when you look at the value of Safaricom, it's slightly bigger than the value of the shares, if you're talking about what is in the market. So when you sell 15%, which is the value you're talking about, 244.5 billion shillings, what is the real worth of what you're selling?
You see, Sam, what we are doing is divestiture. We are not selling the company. It should be understood that we are not selling this company as a going concern. If we were selling the company as a going concern, then you'd start valuing all the assets and taking care of all the liabilities, and then you get the value of the firm. But we are selling the shares. Alternative would have been to go to the market and offer the shares in the Nairobi Securities Exchange, and you'll get 28 shillings per share. Now, we have sold the 15, we have not sold. We are starting the process of divesting 15% of the shareholding. And so you're actually offloading the shares. And so you have to work with the prices of the shares. In fact, if we went to the market to divest to the public, we could definitely sold or divest the shares at a discount. That is the obvious case, and that is how it happens in most transactions, especially block sale. The reason why we are getting this premium sale is because the company that is taking up these shares is a company that has history with this firm, with this company, Safaricom PLC. Vodacom has already 40%, and so they can take higher risk than any other investor coming into the market. And that is why it was better to discuss and agree among the shareholders, the Kenya government and also the Vodacom. They are both shareholders of this company. And so it was easier to negotiate even a higher price. If we went out there and floated the shares the normal way, you would likely get a discounted price, even from the 25 shillings.
Let's talk about the price of 34 shillings briefly, because you're saying, of course, it's the product of the weighted average price over the last 6 months. Is that what you said? But at the same time, we understand that there was an interim dividend that would have been expected. How did you factor that into the price?
The interim dividend that would have been expected is why we have part of the sale or the divestiture, including the dividend. We are getting 40 billion as dividend in advance. So that will be part of the interim dividend that was supposed to be paid to the government of Kenya.
And this would have come in how many years? This dividend in advance?
The 40 billion?
Yes.
It depends on how the company makes profit, and so it is recouped over a period. So, you can't determine how much dividend will be declared next year and the following year and the following year. We know that we are getting a 40 billion shillings dividend in advance, and that will be recouped over the years. Because based on the 20%, because we still have 20% shareholding.
Yes.
So if, for example, in the 2026, the declared dividend is 11 billion relating to 20%, I hope you understand what I'm talking about there. Because we have been getting about 18 billion per year.
Yes.
On 35% shareholding. Now, with the 20% shareholding, let's say it's about 11 billion. So that will be recouped and to the 40 billion.
Let me get that right again, because there's the statement here released by Safaricom says that Vodafone Kenya buying the right to receive future Safaricom dividends for an upfront payment of 40.2 billion shillings to the GOK, in lieu of future dividends that will accrue to the GOK's residual 20% sharing in Safaricom. In simple terms, you're saying that the 20% stake that government of Kenya will still keep, the dividend accruing to that will not be paid to you.
Will not be paid to the GOK because we are getting it in advance. Now, that right now devolves automatically to Vodacom.
So, for how many years?
You see, Sam, I think that is what I've answered. You cannot say for so many years, because then you will be assuming that the dividend will be constant every year. Companies make different profits every year. So for example...
This right that you've sold, it's for eternity?
It's not for eternity. It's for the period that the dividend accruing to us will be able to compensate for the 40 billion. Let me explain it this way. It is 40 billion received in advance.
Yeah.
Now, 2026, Safaricom makes profit. And that out of that profit, 11 billion is for the 20% shareholding available for GOK. That will be recouped from the 40 billion that has already been paid. Then the following year, again, dividend is declared. How much relates to the 20%, again, is recouped from the 40. The moment you pay the entire 40, or you recoup the entire 40, then now the dividend starts devolving.
The right to revert to the government.
The right reverts.
Okay, all right. We'll continue with these conversations, including some of the few calculations that we have. Then you can weigh them against what you have as the government of Kenya, or rather the Waziri representing the government of Kenya. And this will continue shortly, but also to remind you that News Gang will not be showing today because we have to have this conversation. Let's first of all look at another story, which is about civil society groups have accused the IEBC of presiding over what they call sham by-elections, condemning the just concluded polls as a blatant departure from constitutional principles. They also fault the government for deploying state machinery, engaging in voter bribery and intimidation, and openly campaigning for state-sponsored candidates. And as Mary Mwoki now reports, watchdog organizations are warning that these electoral failures, if left unchecked, pose a direct and dangerous threat to the credibility of the 2027 general election.
The IEBC was the subject of a blistering indictment as 4 leading civil society organizations accused the polls agency of failing its most basic mandate, delivering free, fair and credible elections. Instead, they say the by-elections morphed into a theater of state-sponsored manipulation, intimidation and open bribery. The groups allege that the commission looked the other way as state agents deployed threats, money, and even armed goons to sway outcomes in at least 22 electoral areas. Police, they add, did little to stem the violence and in some instances appeared to enable it.
The state agencies played the most decisive role in orchestrating the violence and coercion that marked election day on November 27. These by-elections were almost marked by violence and intimidation across multiple constituencies.
One area chief in Malaba summoned women's group and youth leaders and warned them that voting for an opposition candidate would invite trouble from Nairobi. The cue was taken from Cabinet Secretary Musalia Mudavadi and the National Assembly Speaker, Moses Wetangula. Most alarming finding is the involvement of the Interior Minister in subverting the will of the people.
The civil watchdogs say election observers were blocked from accessing polling stations, while ruling party agents were allowed unfettered access. They accuse some senior government officials of intimidating voters and agents at polling stations.
Bribery emerged as the state's most organized tactic. In virtually all 22 electoral areas, cash handouts were openly distributed during the campaign period by individuals identified by residents as state and county officials using government vehicles. We observed extensive misuse of public resources to benefit ruling party candidates.
The groups say this systemic misuse of state resources created an uneven playing field, disenfranchising young people, women, and persons with disabilities who cannot compete financially. They also accuse IPOA of being complicit and the IEBC of failing to curb bribery, violence, and interference inside polling centers.
IEBC should admit failure in exercising or in fulfilling its mandate, and therefore apologize to Kenyans for the failure to exercise its constitutional role in management of elections.
We demand for full implementation of the Campaign Financing Act to streamline the use of resources during campaigns. It's these illicit resources that have found their way into the campaigns and enabled people to pay money to goons, to intimidate voters, to promote violence and also voter bribery.
The teams are calling for strict vetting of candidates under Chapter 6 and immediate IPOA probe into police misconduct. They warn that unless urgent steps are taken, Kenya risks walking into the 2027 general election with a compromised electoral system. Mary Mwoki, Citizen TV.
And related to that, opposition leaders are warning that rising goonism and violence during polls must be urgently addressed to safeguard Kenya's democracy. Speaking at the burial of former Mboni Member of Parliament Joseph Munyao in Makueni County, Wiper Party leader Kalonzo Musyoka, DPK Party leader Eugene Wamalwa, and DP leader Justin Muturi cautioned that recent by-elections marred by chaos are a clear warning that electoral reforms are urgently needed ahead of 2027. The funeral briefly turned tense when Labour Cabinet Secretary Dr. Alfred Mutua was heckled while reading the President's condolence message, forcing presiding Archbishop Dr. Timothy Dambuki to step in and calm the crowd. Opposition leaders remembered Munyao as a statesman committed to peace and democracy.
They brought out their very worst in this recent by-elections. We now know their game plan. There are no other games to play. And this country cannot be like any other country.
Violence during election time is a terrible violation of the electoral laws.
The team that brought back multi-party democracy at a great sacrifice. That democracy is in great peril if we cannot allow free and fair elections in our country.
We had done a clause in the Election Offences Act which was going to bar any politician who instigated violence. We had put it in the election offences. It's not too late to bar politicians.
All right, with that story, we're taking a short break here on Tonight. But remember, we have the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Economic Planning, John Mbadi, here to answer your questions about the intended sale of a stake of the government in Safaricom. But at the same time, more questions on privatization and the state of the economy. Do stay tuned for that. We're back in a moment. Here is what's coming up.
Mamochari kukanyaga miri, kufungua miri, hatumuoni.
Stalled investigations. Family of Caroline Mokera, who went missing more than 6 weeks ago, want an independent probe into her whereabouts.
Welcome back. Now, Tanzania is at the risk of straining its relations with the United States after Washington issued a stark warning of possible action against the East African nation. In its statement, the U.S. accuses Tanzania of escalating repression of religious freedoms and free speech, citing persistent barriers to American investment and reports of violence against civilians in the days surrounding the October 29 elections. The diplomatic tension intensifies just as the Tanzania police force issues a tough warning against planned anti-government demonstrations, declaring that organizers of the indefinite mass protest will face the full force of the law. Citizen TV's Ben Kirui has the details.
It is a statement out of Washington that has placed Tanzania at a diplomatic crossroads. The United States, in a strongly worded communication, announcing a review of its partnership with Tanzania, warning that recent events have put American citizens, tourists, and U.S. interest in the country at risk. Washington points to a sharp escalation in the repression of religious and speech freedoms, coupled with reports of violence against civilians in the run-up to the October 29th elections. These concerns, the U.S. says, are now straining the long-standing relations between the two nations. The mounting diplomatic friction comes barely a day after President Samia Suluhu Hassan publicly rebuked several foreign governments, accusing them of meddling in Tanzania's internal affairs.
Hawana hata aibu. Nje huko wanakaa, Tanzania ifanye moja, ifanye mbili, ifanye tatu, halafu ndio itakuwa hivi. Who are you?
And the pressure on Dodoma is growing. The European Parliament recently passed a resolution urging the AU to suspend funding to Tanzania following election-related violence that left civilians dead and caused extensive property damage. Meanwhile, tensions are rising at home. The Tanzania police force has issued a stern warning against the nationwide demonstrations planned for December 9th. Government spokesperson David Misime accuses organizers of attempting to drag the country into chaos, reminiscent of the unrest witnessed after the October 29th elections.
Ni uhalifu mkubwa unaoendelea kuhamasishwa. Hali kama hii kwa nchi yoyote ile duniani ni tishio kubwa la maisha ya watu, uchumi wa nchi na masuala yote ya kijamii.
The police say they have been monitoring organizers online and will crack down on anyone attempting to destabilize the country. But former member of parliament Ezekia Wenje of the ruling CCM has called for calm ahead of the protest.
Jeshi la polisi kwa kushirikiana na vyombo vingine vya ulinzi na usalama vimekuwa vikifuatilia kwa karibu sana yanayoendelea katika mitandao ya kijamii na kwenye makundi sogozi, wakihamasisha wanayoyaita maandamano ya amani yasiyo na kikomo.
Our people, demonstration is anchored in our laws, but peaceful demonstrations, not vandalism, not going around beating people, setting business on fire, destroying the country. That is not demonstrations.
The police warning comes just a day after President Samia, in a national address, claimed that the October 29th protesters were financed by external forces, describing the unrest as an attempted coup and defending the heavy-handed response of security agencies. Ben Kirui, Citizen TV, Nairobi.
President William Ruto today witnessed the signing of a 1.6 billion shilling investment plan in Kenya covering the next 5 years. The funding will support government of Kenya's systems, including the Social Health Authority, Digital Health Authority, KEMSA, IFMIS, MOH, and NPHI through G2G modalities. The agreement also includes a joint multi-year transition and co-financing plan for laboratory systems, surveillance, workforce, and commodities. Under the plan, 515 laboratory workers and other 13,000 health workers will be absorbed into the government of Kenya in 2028. President Ruto had earlier met IMF officials to discuss ways to strengthen Kenya's economic stability.
The framework we signed today adds momentum to my administration's universal health coverage that is focused on supply of modern equipment to our hospitals, efficient and timely delivery of health commodities to our facilities, enhancement of our health workforce, and health insurance for all, leaving no Kenyan behind.
And what it means is that money is not just going to be spent to provide medicine and care, it's going to be spent to improve the domestic infrastructure, healthcare infrastructure, so that in 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years, countries will say, we no longer need this much assistance, if any, because we have our own system, you've helped us to build it, it's now delivering results, and in fact, we now, these third, like maybe Kenya, want to go and teach other countries how to do it.
All right, in the studios, we're still with the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Economic Planning, John Mbadi. We had started talking about the situation that the government now intends to sell part of its shares within Safaricom, which is 15% of the shareholding in that institution. Let's first take a look at some of the numbers that we have looking at the current ownership before that transaction succeeds. We are talking about the government of Kenya owning 35% of the stake in Safaricom. Vodafone Group has 39.93, almost 40% of the stake there. There are institutions that own up to 0.83% and others, including Kenyan citizens who invested in the initial public offering of Safaricom way back at 24.23%. Now, should this transaction succeed, this is what is going to happen. Vodafone Group is going to control a stake of 55%, up from just below 40%. The government of Kenya's stake will reduce from 35% to 20%, and the general public will keep its 25%, which is inclusive of individuals and institutions. Now, the government of Kenya is selling the 6 billion shares. Of course, it's 6 billion and 9.8 million shares, which is equivalent to 15% stake within Safaricom. Let's just take a look at what that would mean in terms of dividends. At the moment, the financial year ending March 2025, Safaricom declared a full-year dividend of 1.2 shillings, that is 1 shilling 20 cents per share. At the time, the government shares was about 14 billion and 22 million. And therefore, if you had to calculate that 1.2 times the number of shares, it you get to the dividends accruing to the government to about 16.8%. Of course, that is before tax. Then, if you had to look at once the government of Kenya divests from Safaricom up to 15% of that stake, then you'll find that if you sell the 6 billion shares, the estimated dividends that would have accrued to those shares is about 7.2 billion, using the figure of 1 shilling 20 cents of the full year dividends declared by Safaricom. The government's residual stake, based on that calculation, is about 8.01 billion shares, which is equivalent to 20%. And the estimated dividends accruing to that is 9.6%. And if the sold rights are fetching 40.2 billion shillings, if you had to use the same rate that was 1 shilling 20 cents for Safaricom dividends, then you're talking about 4.2 years is what the government would take to earn that with a stake of 20%. Let's just take a look at how else the chain of ownership occurs within Safaricom. So Vodacom Group Limited, which is a multinational, owns, as soon as that transaction is completed, will own 100% of Vodafone Kenya, and therefore the same will own Safaricom Limited up to 55%. And Waziri, if you're to look at that reality, that means that at least at the point of starting, 55% of that company is owned by foreigners or foreign investors. How does that do to the national psyche of people that have been saying, we have this stake here? How do you calm the nerves of those that are saying, how do you sell off a company fetching you up to 18 billion shillings per year?
Yeah, first of all, I want to make it very clear that what we are doing is what we call unlocking value for a mature investment. The Safaricom PLC, as an investment for the Republic of Kenya, as it is today, is a mature investment. And that is what you can unlock. You can unlock the value and invest it in other productive ventures. And I will tell you for a fact, Sam, that this probably the right time to divest, because again, this company is surviving on technology. And digital technology advances and changes. Where we are is the 5G and of course the fiber. The next stage is for fintech and expansion in the region. You need to free and unlock government investment in this company to be able to advance. But again, Something else is that I don't know how much time this would take, but I will tell you for a fact that for us to be able to continue doing infrastructure projects in this country, you need to have capital. You need to have resources to do it. And presently, you can do it in two ways. One is taxation, the other one is debt. Now, taxation, putting more or hiking taxes is not an option.
Right.
Going to more debt is not an option. Yet we have huge investment projects that we need to put money in to be able to realize economic growth that would create job opportunities to our country.
Right.
Now, you need to have more creative ways of raising funds, and this is one of them. Now, the other thing that I would also mention, it is not that the government of Kenya will now forgo the 16 or 18 billion. We will still get almost about 10 billion every year if we continue with the current rates of performance or dividend or profitability of Safaricom PLC. What you forgo is probably about 7 billion per year, which if we were to reason that way in straight line, we are receiving 200 billion today. How long will you receive that money at 7 billion shillings? If we were to take that simplistic arithmetic, it's about 30 years. Now, depending on where you invest this money, because I think the fear maybe Kenyans have here is that we are divesting in Safaricom 15%, getting this money and consuming it or putting it in budgetary support. That is not what we intend to do. What we intend to do is to productively use the resources that we are going to raise by divesting 15% in Safaricom and any other privatization, put it in a national infrastructure fund, which then we would use to link the private sector and institutional investors with public investment or public infrastructure. Sam, let me ask you this question. Kenya is growing its economy now, or the economy is growing at 5%. Analysis and studies have shown that for Kenya to create employment opportunities that would match the number of the youth who come out of colleges to join the labor market, we need at least 7% economic growth. How are we going to realize economic growth without further investment in infrastructure projects like roads? Today, our major trading partner is Uganda. To reach Uganda is a nightmare. It is affecting our economy in that respect. The other neighbor is Tanzania, which is our trading partner. How do you reach Tanzania when the road from Nairobi to Namanga is a challenge? We have the issues of food security, and we need to depend now on irrigated agriculture as opposed to rain-fed agriculture, which is proving unreliable. Many people will tell you, and studies have shown, that direct foreign investment in this country cannot be realized easily because of the cost of energy arising out of reliability and cost. Now, we need to put more resources to energy generation, electricity energy generation, and the transmission. Where will you get resources when now you cannot raise more resources from taxes because Kenyans are complaining of higher taxes, and they are right to complain. Where will you get resources when you don't have fiscal space in your budget? The debt level is unsustainable. You must be more creative. Look at those public investment infrastructure projects which are commercially viable, which you can now have seed capital and attract private investment, blend the resources. That is what we call blending of capital.
Right. And Waziri, we'll be talking about that because, of course, we had the president saying during the State of the Nation address about the two funds, the two critical funds, that is the National Sovereign Wealth Fund and also the National Infrastructure Fund that is supposed to be created. But I also want us to talk a little bit about the process that has been followed, because in that communication that came from Safaricom, the public announcement, it talks about completion of the transaction is subject to approval from certain government and regulatory authorities in Kenya, including the cabinet, the Kenyan Cabinet, Kenyan National Assembly, Capital Markets Authority, Communications Authority of Kenya, Central Bank of Kenya, COMESA Competition Commission, and the East African Community Competition Authority. If this is the case, at this point, has the Kenyan Cabinet applied its mind on this transaction?
Thank you, Sam. And you know, that is why I think sometimes we rush into conclusions. Actually, the this process will take 4 stages.
Yeah.
The first stage is proposal initiation. The next stage is approval by National Assembly and the Cabinet. And then there is the National Assembly, sorry to speak. And then there is the execution, and then finally proceeds and reporting. Now, where we are is the initial stage of proposal initiation.
Yes.
What the government has done is to announce that this is what we intend to do in the spirit of accountability and transparency. We are communicating to Kenyans and telling them this is the intention, this is the negotiation that we have done. Now, the Cabinet has already engaged its mind on this matter.
Okay.
So from here, already I am communicating to the National Assembly. And this is now going to kick off the process of public participation and engagement with people's representatives. You know, when you listen to comments, especially from Ndindi Nyoro and being a member of parliament, he's talking like we have concluded this process. This process is just beginning. This is what we call proposal initiation.
Yes.
What we have done is to be transparent, and I don't know why we should be condemned for being transparent. Previously, there were complaints that we first complete transactions is when we come and explain to Kenyans. Now we are starting, and we are telling them this is the discussion that we have had, this is what is intended to be done. So the process then moves to the National Assembly.
Right.
And from the National Assembly, there will be other regulatory bodies like CMA is coming in, because for block sales, the CMA, the Capital Markets Authority, must give prior approval. So that process is going to take place. CBK will be involved, Competition Authority will be involved, all these bodies that are involved by law. And we are going to apply Section 87A of the Public Finance Management Act and the Privatization Act, which has just been passed. All these processes will kick in. And then the next step will now be the execution. The execution will also be another step, where again there will be valuation done. Again, even though we have already negotiated and discussed and agreed on the valuation, there will be another valuation done at that
And therefore the question, because if you look at this statement from Safaricom and from yourselves, it's very detailed and almost, it shows a very extensive thinking that has gone into it.
Yeah.
What is the role of Parliament, for instance? What would it take Parliament?
What it would take Parliament is now, as people's representative, to give approval, because that is what the legal framework demands.
Yep.
And it will take Parliament now to conduct public participation as people's representative. Public participation is not in the Privatization Act, but it is inferred, because the Constitution demands for public participation. And even in Public Finance Management Act, it calls for public participation. So public participation will be done at this stage.
Yep.
And Kenyans may come forward and say, we don't want the shares to be offloaded, some people, to be divested. Some people will support it. So based on that, the National Assembly will input. The law is not clear whether National Assembly can amend or adjust, but they can propose changes because it is silent.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that will be discussed.
What if Parliament says no?
If Parliament fails to approve, then the whole process stops. It's frustrated.
Would that have an impact on the stability of Safaricom, including shares?
I don't think so, but that, Safaricom is listed in the Nairobi Securities Exchange.
Yep.
And so if the transaction does not fall through, we will revert back to status quo. So I don't see how it can affect the value of Safaricom or its operations in any way.
Okay.
But I was just saying that then we move to the execution stage, which is execution stage will now lead to concluding the transaction, and then the proceeds now comes to the consolidated fund, but we will take it now to the special fund, that is the National Infrastructure Fund, and part of it will go to the sovereign.
When do you expect this transaction to conclude to the extent that you now receive the proceeds?
There are no timelines in the law, although you can expedite. So that is why I was calling upon the National Assembly to expedite the process so that we move forward, so that Kenyans can gain value out of this transaction, because I believe there is going to be value out of it.
But
and if you allow me time,
you must be working with some targets.
Well, we are thinking of like 90 days for, you see, Parliament will have like 7 to 21 days for the committee of the House, the two committees to deal with the public participation and all the rest.
Which are those committees?
The two committees is the Finance Committee of the National Assembly and the Privatization Committee. There are two committees.
Nothing for Public Investments Committee?
No, sorry, the Privatization Committee. Public Investment Committees are dealing with, those are morticians. They deal with things that have already been concluded. Those are
audit reports.
Yeah, those are audit committees.
Okay.
So it is the two committees. It's the Finance Committee and the Privatization Committee.
If you talk about 90 days, is it realistic? Parliament is on recess starting tonight. They come back on 9th
What we are saying is once the process starts,
Yeah.
the turnaround should be around 90 days. I'm not explicit because the timings are not in the law.
Yeah.
And again, you can't dictate to Parliament how to transact its business. We can only plead with Parliament and appeal to them to fast track and expedite. I believe the Parliament, when it resumes, and maybe the committee may start dealing with this matter even when they are on recess, and then when Parliament resumes, the matter is debated in Parliament and concluded. Okay. Then we start now the process of execution, which will again take some time. Okay? After which, then now we will get the proceeds. Fortunately, you know, if it goes the way we have planned the transaction, and Vodacom gets opportunity to conclude with us this transaction, then Vodacom is a reputable company with the financial strength to make payment. Okay. It will not end like some other transactions which have ended where you now conclude and then the company does not have the money.
Now, as you say that, you're also hoping that Sovereign Wealth Fund and the National Infrastructure Fund are completed. First, when I look at the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the draft itself, it has no place of how it would receive proceeds from Safaricom or divestiture in Safaricom, because the divestiture they talk about is investments of the government of Kenya in natural resources or petroleum. How do you then go ahead with the transaction, hoping that it's going to feed into a fund which is not even created, and even the draft does not provide for it?
Yes, we are hoping and expecting the Sovereign Wealth Fund to be, the debate and the bill to be processed quickly. I know now the draft is with the Attorney General, and they're working around it, and it will go to Parliament. Sovereign Wealth Fund, if you look at it, the architect of it was more leaning towards the minerals and petroleum products. That was in anticipation that Kenya was going to get or to heat oil and the rest. But we are proposing amendment to the law to allow for about 10% of the proceeds of privatization also to go to the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Why? Because there is what we call intergenerational equity. Okay. The future generation should get a portion of what we have today. And so the thinking of the government is that we should allow a small percentage to go to the Sovereign Wealth Fund for intergenerational wealth and for intergenerational equity. But the bulk of it will go to the National Infrastructure Fund, which fund will create assets for the future. So actually this is outward looking.
It's not created yet.
The National
Infrastructure Fund.
No, the National Infrastructure Fund, the discussion, there is the feeling that we really don't have to have law as in an act to create a National Infrastructure Fund. You can create it through regulations, and we can budget through the budgetary process, because funds can be created by the National Assembly. Okay. So we are working on the details of that. And by the way, this process is not going to be concluded in 2 months, 3 months. It will take a while. Okay. Before that happens, we will have had in place a National Infrastructure Fund.
We'll talk about that and more later on the conversation with the Cabinet Secretary, National Treasury, John Mbadi. He's here to answer all your questions that you may have. You can start to send them in via 22422, that is the SMS line, or you can write to us on X at Sam Gituku at Citizen TV Kenya. The hashtag to use is Tonight. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. Please remember, we still have the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury to talk about the developments within Safaricom, but also the privatization issues in the country and also the state of the economy at the moment. And so many questions that you're already sending to us. We'll be sampling some of them. Now, the Media Council of Kenya has condemned former Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua for what it termed as reckless and dangerous attacks on a journalist and the larger media fraternity during a public event on Wednesday. In a statement, MCK warned that Gachagwa's remarks amount to intimidation and pose a serious threat to media freedom and the safety of journalists.
Wajua kawaida kwenye jamii.
Former Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua has launched a blistering attack on journalists, accusing the media of outright bias.
I want to ask the media to be responsible and to stop open bias. On Sunday, I said that DCP is in talks with Wiper and other parties in the United Oppositions. And we have looked at the formula in Nairobi, regional composition, party loyalties, and past performances.
Gachagwa's remarks came after a Sunday Thanksgiving ceremony in Kariobangi North, which was marked by chaos. The DCP party leader accused multiple news outlets of misreporting his statements. Gachagua claiming journalists were twisting narratives in favor of the government of the day.
Please, you people from the newspapers, report correctly. Don't twist narratives so that you can help William Ruto to spew nonsense.
The Media Council of Kenya has condemned the remarks, warning that targeting journalists puts their safety at risk. With Kenya heading toward the 2027 general election, the council says journalists must be free to scrutinize political leaders without fear or intimidation. MCK reminded political leaders that media freedom is protected under Article 34 of the Constitution and urged authorities to safeguard journalists from growing threats. The council also urged all current and former leaders to immediately stop targeting, threatening, or inciting harm against journalists and called on law enforcement to provide adequate protection to media workers facing growing risks. Lillian Muli, Citizen TV.
The family of Caroline Mokeira, who went missing more than 6 weeks ago, is asking for an independent probe into the whereabouts of their daughter. The family says the investigations by the police have stalled with no meaningful steps taken since her disappearance. The police say in the ensuing weeks they have been unable to gather what they term as proper information on the case. Brenda Wanga now reports on the family's agony and the seeming police lagging in action.
The missing persons posters plastered across estates in Kitale town are a stark reminder of a family's agony 6 weeks in the making. Caroline Mokeira Joash, a resident of Kitale town, was last seen on the 17th of October in the company of her husband Tobias Keller. She has not been seen since then. Her family, left in despair, have searched high and low for her. That search has come up empty time and again.
Sasa tunangoja, tunaenda, tumetembea mamochari, kukanyaga miri, kufungua miri, hatumuoni. Tumeenda mistuni, tumeenda mito.
Tunalia, haturali usingizi. Tunachoka.
The family of Mokeira reported her missing and their case was taken up by the local DCI. The family says the investigations seem to have hit a dead end.
Serikali mara mingi tunasikia ya kwamba mtu anaweza potea kama siku moja, mbili, tatu, lakini anapatikana. Sisi tunaanza kujiuliza hivi, kwa sababu gani huyu Caroline? Kwa sababu tangu apotee ni kama miezi miwili inaenda kuisha. Kwa sababu gani yeye achapatikana?
The prolonged disappearance and lack of answers from the investigating agencies has left this family dejected. They say they are ready for any information that will bring them closure.
Nimepata sleepless nights, sio rahisi manake unajaribu kufikiria bila yako huyo mtoto unashindwa. Afadhali hata nionyeshwe kama amekufa, nijue amekufa. Ama kama ako hai nitafurahia sana serikali.
Last month, her husband was arrested alongside another suspect. Both were released when the prosecution failed to convince the courts to hold them as they concluded investigations. The courts further restrained the police from arresting the two suspects but ordered that they report to the Trans Nzoia West Sub-County Criminal Investigations Officer twice every week. The Trans Nzoia DCI boss, Josephat Ndungu, when contacted for clarity on whether the husband and the other suspect report as directed and on the progress of the investigations, told our team that the police did not have any proper information on the case at the moment. The family say they will keep hope alive, that the police will get that proper information sooner rather than later. They just want to know what happened to their daughter. Brenda Wanga, Citizen TV.
Quite a harrowing story for the family. The national government will immediately begin the operationalization of 18 new Kenya Medical Training College campuses across the country. Deputy President Professor Kithure Kindiki, who presided over the 94th KMTC graduation ceremony, announced that the government will allocate 1 billion shillings to allow more admission of students. The Deputy President emphasized that KMTC plays a pivotal role in training medical professionals and community health promoters, key pillars in the realization of universal health coverage. He further noted that the government remains committed to supporting KMTC students through the Higher Education Loans Board, ensuring that more young Kenyans can access medical training opportunities.
Produces 80% of Kenya's Waziri wa Hazina ya Taifa, Waziri wa Afya, Waziri wa Elimu. Wiki ijayo naenda kukutana nao ili tuwapatie jibu, kwa sababu mimi najua ya kwamba na nimesawishika ya kwamba wanafunzi wa KMTC lazima tuanze kuwasupport kupitia HELB.
As a ministry, we are very proud of Kenya Medical Training College. For nearly 100 years, KMTC has been the college of choice.
KMTC graduates constitute over 80% of human resources for health for this country alone. And every year, we send over 5,000 graduates from Kenya Medical Training College to work in other countries.
Now, the lakeside town of Loyangalani is once again buzzing with color and celebration as all 14 communities of Marsabit County converged for the 14th annual Lake Turkana Cultural Festival. Under the theme Celebrating Our Diversity, Strengthening Our Unity, Marsabit Governor Mohamud Ali, who officially opened the 3-day cultural extravaganza, says the time is ripe for investors to set their sights on the county, noting that peace and stability have held more than a decade. The festival continues to serve as a platform to showcase Marsabit's cultural richness while positioning the region as a prime destination for ecotourism.
My prayer is simple, that this festival will reawaken in all of us a deeper sense of shared humanity, that it will renew our collective commitment to peaceful coexistence, and that it will inspire stronger partnerships for development, so that cultural beauty is matched by improved livelihoods, better infrastructure, quality education, services and dignity for every citizen of Marsabit.
Business News, brought to you by Emirates.
The best holiday ever's finally over.
When you fly Emirates, your holiday isn't over until your flight is over.
In business, Family Bank has raised just over 8 billion shillings in a heavily oversubscribed private share placement, surpassing its 6 billion shilling target by a wide margin. The bank announced today in Nairobi that the offer closed at 131% subscription, drawing strong interest from pension funds, insurers, fund managers, corporates and individual investors. The bank plans to channel the fresh capital into accelerating its digital transformation agenda, expanding lending capacity and supporting growth initiatives both in Kenya and across the region. Family Bank CEO Nancy Njau has described the overwhelming response as a powerful endorsement of the bank's commitment to SMEs, agriculture and underserved communities. Experts in accounting have called for the customization of the International Financial Reporting Standards to fit the African context. Speaking on the sidelines of the Africa Members Convention in Mombasa, various stakeholders drawn from the private sector noted the glaring gaps, especially in data collection, that prevent African companies from promptly adopting sustainability reporting. In Kenya, ISPAC had outlined a phased approach for the mandatory adoption of the standards beginning 2027 through to 2029 for SMEs. The adoption of IFRS sustainability disclosure standards is aimed at ensuring consistency with the international baseline to facilitate investment and participation in global markets.
Or is projected to continue dropping, but the people who are living in poverty are still living.
Why
Do we as Africa need, can we not get simplified standards? Important? Absolutely. But how do we get those simplified from an African context? A taxpayer or a client will not want to pay an arm and a leg. You mentioned they're quite intense, right? Would I want to pay an arm and a leg just for that sustainable reporting, or can I get a simplified version of it?
ISSB Knowledge Hub, guys, go for it. They also have what we call the transitional reliefs, meaning that if you are adopting S1 and S2 for the very first time, there are some requirements that you don't need to actually comply with in the first year of adoption. So go study those transitional reliefs. It makes things very easy for you in adopting.
Thank you, Jamil Ampomale.
And Kenya has inched closer to streamlining its biotechnology framework as senior government officials, regulators and scientists opened a high-level roundtable in Nairobi aimed at clearing long-standing policy barriers to modern agricultural technologies. Stakeholders present, however, lamented ongoing court cases, saying they are slowing progress and delaying farmers' access to biotech solutions. Dennis Otieno reports.
The forum, convened by the Cereal Growers Association, seeks to strengthen the country's biotech policy environment and support safe adoption of new technologies among smallholder farmers.
It's about every technology that a farmer needs. And the gaps that exist are varied, but mostly there will be the issue of awareness. And that's why I'm talking about sensitization, because the technology could be there, but if a farmer is not aware, if it's not affordable, for example, then you cannot say that that technology is accessible to them, it is helpful to them.
Experts say broader engagement across farmers, researchers and regulators is crucial to accelerate progress.
We have now to open very aggressive discussions with the farmers, the market, the scientists, the regulators, and all the stakeholders therein, so that we come up with a solution that can solve most of the problems that we are having as a country.
However, stakeholders warn that ongoing legal battles continue to delay rollout of innovations already cleared for use.
So far, we are dealing with more than 12 cases challenging the adoption of this innovation, the biotech, in the country.
The roundtable is expected to recommend concrete actions and timelines to help Kenya unlock biotechnology for food security and climate resilience. Dennis Otieno, Citizen TV.
Business News, brought to you by Emirates.
The best holiday ever's finally over.
When you fly Emirates, your holiday isn't over until your flight is over.
That's business, and we're taking a short break. But before you do, so much feedback coming in, including Son of Africa is asking, Safaricom Limited is already a sovereign wealth in a safer fiscal space. Why move it to a newly created sovereign fund with no growth plan? Is a question to Waziri. There are other people, a lot of people who are asking about, you should clarify on the fate of confirmation of 20,000 intern teachers, alongside other questions that are coming. We'll be sampling some of them for Waziri to respond. But at the same time, remember, we are talking about the proposed a sale of government stake in Safaricom, but at the same time, the bigger question of privatization and the state of the economy at a time that different reports are showing that actually Kenyans are becoming poorer. Stay tuned. Coming up, National Treasury Cabinet Secretary John Mbadi speaks on planned Safaricom sale, privatization, and the bigger question of economy.